Hello, everybody. My name is Okie Dokie. Now, you might wonder, how would a person get a name like Okie Dokie? Well, when I was a baby, they handed me to my dad and they said, "Name that boy." And my dad said, "Okie Dokie." And that's how I got my name, which is better than my sister's name. Her name is Ida, but that's short for I don't know. I think she scared him a little bit. But anyhow, with a name like Okie Dokie, you'd think I'd want to know about Oklahoma history. And I did, and I do. And so I went all the way down to Oklahoma City and walked up towards the state capitol. And as I did, I saw 14 flagpoles. And on those 14 flagpoles were 13 different flags, and one flag was empty. We'll talk about one flagpole was empty. We'll talk about that later. However, each of those flags was different. Now, if you go to the state capitol today, because that was 30 years ago, if you go there today, why, what you're going to see is 14 flagpoles and 14 Oklahoma flags on those poles. But back then, each flag was different, and they signified people who owned the state or claimed our state, and these flags came across our state. Now, you'd think the very first flag to come across our state would be a Native American flag because the Native Americans were there. However, did they have flags? No. They didn't use little rectangular pieces of cloth to say who they were. So they didn't have flags. You'd also might think that the first flag would be the flag of Columbus. Well, you know Columbus, his little green flag of Queen Isabella. Why, Columbus, he just got down into here. He really didn't get all the way up into our state. And so he arrived down in here and then went home. And so that flag never really crossed our Oklahoma boundary there. Well, so the first flag to fly over the state of Oklahoma was actually the Royal Standard of Spain. And here it is. Now you might be wondering, how did I come by these flags? Well, 30 years ago, what I said to them is, when those flags get old and tired, what do you do with them? And they said, we take them down and we burn them. And so I said, the next time you take them down, do you think you could give them to me so I could tell people all about Oklahoma history? And you know what they said? Okie dokie. That's right. So when I show you these flags, they're a little bit worn, but these flags used to fly at the state capitol, and the very first one was the Royal Standard of Spain. Now this flag is the flag of the conquistadors. Now, we know that the conquistadors came up through into Oklahoma area. We know that because there were reports from the Native Americans that there were people coming through riding on big dogs. They called them the dog people. And they, oddly enough, wore their cooking pots on their heads instead of hats. Now, of course, we know today that was their helmets and their armor, and they were riding on horses. But of the Native Americans living in the plains at that time, they had never seen a horse. So one of the great things that happened with this Royal Standard of Spain as it came across our state was that the horses came into our state, and naturally Spain got another gift too, because there's an exchange, and that exchange was corn. Our maize or our corn was amazing and it was what we traded for with the Spaniards as they came across. So Spain landed up here and came across our land. So that flag actually touched our land. Now, the second flag to cross our land was a little bit different. This is the second flag. Now you might say, that looks like the flag of Great Britain. Well, the truth is, this is the Great Union flag Great Britain, because at this time they didn't have Scotland involved. They didn't have Scotland involved. They just had Ireland and England. And later on, when they added Scotland, they added an extra, what they call a St. Andrew's cross coming through here. So there'd be an extra line in there, and that would be the flag of today. But back then, it was the Great Union flag of those two. And it did come across our state in a special way. You see, the idea of trading, well, first let me tell you how they claimed us, because that's kind of funny in some ways. You see, these colonies up in here, these English colonies, whenever the king would give you some land, why, he would say, I know what the northern border is, I know what the southern border is, but I know what the eastern border is, of course, it's the ocean. But the western border, yeah, we'll just say it goes from sea to shining sea. And so, like the Carolinas, when they were given to the people here from England, why, they claimed all the way across without even knowing that they accidentally claimed us. But the truth is, did that flag come across our state? Yes, it did. Of course, we know it wasn't a state yet. One of the things that the English liked was beaver hats. Now, this is an actual beaver hat. It's got fur on it, very thin fur. Well, the Indians would trap the beavers and trade them for things that they liked, like axe handles and things made of steel that they liked. Axe blades. And that way, they traded, and this flag would arrive on our side of the land there, and the fur trappers, or the traders, why, they would set up a post. And on top of the post, they'd put this flag. And everybody knew that was a trading post. So that meant the tribes could come and trade for the things they liked, and the British could take home the things that they liked. So that's how we were claimed by the Spaniards, who came up across and claimed all the land, and then by England, who claimed us by their colonies back over in here. But the odd one is the next flag. This is the flag of King Louis. Let me get it out there. Yeah. The flag of King Louis of France. Now, there was a fellow by the name of LaSalle. Now, LaSalle started up in here, and he came all the way down the Mississippi River there, all the way down to New Orleans, and went up and down the Mississippi, and he claimed every piece of land drained by the Mississippi belonged to King Louis of France, and he called it Louisiana, or King Louis's place. Yeah. Now, the funny thing about Oklahoma, now if you pour water pretty much anywhere in Oklahoma, it's going to find its way to the Mississippi River down to the feet of LaSalle. So all of this was all drained by the Mississippi River and claimed by France. Now think about that. The French claimed this area, and the English claimed this area, and the Spanish claimed this area. What do you think's going to happen? Well, that's right. Didn't really affect us very much over here where we were, but it was a great war that lasted 7 years, or almost, and they called it the 7-Year War. Now, the main players, of course, were those three: France, England, and Spain. Now, France felt like they were losing the war, and they hated England. Oh, they hated England. And so they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give half of our land to Spain. That way the English won't get it. Because at the end of the war, they were afraid England would end up with all of this. Well, they gave everything west of the Mississippi, which included us, everything west of the Mississippi, they gave that to Spain. So that way England couldn't get it. And England ended up getting most of this and ended up down here with, they also ended up with Florida there. And then up here was the French country, Canada and such. Well, didn't really matter all that much to us, except for when they set up the trading posts again, a new flag came. Now this here flag, that's the flag of the Empire of Spain. Now you still see the same little lion, the same little castle that we saw earlier, but now it's the Empire. And one little part of that empire was us. Our little land that was part of Louisiana. And of course I kept the name Louisiana Territory, but part of the Louisiana Territory was us, a little bitty part. And this flag, of course, then flew in Oklahoma, the land that would become Oklahoma. Now, when we talk about wars, there was a war that happened about this time that would later on play into our history. This area up in here, they decided that they didn't want to be a part of England anymore. And these were the 13 colonies that broke away during our American Revolution. Now, that didn't affect us much over here because we still belong to Spain. Spain still owned us over here. But there was a young, short French dude who decided he wanted to change all that. And his name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte conquered most of Europe, and he was able to restore France to its greatness by recapturing or retaking all this land. So suddenly, the Louisiana Territory here, originally named after King Louis, why, Louisiana Territory went back to the French, and we, of course, got a new flag to fly over our forts and our trading posts and such. Now, this is the flag of the French Republic, headed by Napoleon. Now, when it first came out, this red stripe here was way over here by the pole, and this blue stripe was way over here. And about 1830, they rotated those two, putting the blue back by the pole and the red over here like this. So it could have been, we could have said there were two different French flags, but they weren't that different. So we just consider it one, even though it just rotates, and we just call that spinning. We just call that the French Revolution. Although that happened earlier. Yeah, that wasn't quite right, was it? But now, Napoleon, he decided that he was a little short of cash. He needed some extra money. And so he didn't really like King Louis all that much. So why would he care about land called Louisiana way across the ocean? So he decided to sell it to this new country here. And their president at that time was Thomas Jefferson. And that's when this flag came across our area. Yes. Now, if you look at it closely, there's something special about this flag. Why? There are 15 stars over there. But look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This is the only American flag with 15 stars and 15 stripes. And so when the Louisiana Purchase occurred, that meant that there were 15 colonies at that time. Well, later on, another 5 were added. So now the flag flying over us now had 20 stars. But were they going to do 20 stripes? No, that would be pretty silly. So what they did instead was they went back to the 13 original colonies, so it's always 13 stripes. But then in a field of blue, listen to what I said. In a field of blue, there'll be 1 star per state. Now, what that means is that this flag right here is the same as your flag. The flag that flies at your library or your school or downtown, it's the same flag. This is Old Glory. Yes, because this flag here has that special little rule that says 1 star per state on a field of blue. Now, Old Glory here, you know, when it was made, why, the laws just said how many stars were there and how many stripes and such. And, of course, this is the Star Spangled Banner, by the way. Very special. But this one here is Old Glory, and it's the same as ours today. Because whenever we add a new state, there were times when I was growing up where there were only 48 states. And then they added Alaska and Hawaii, and so our 48 stars went to 50. And if we decide to add another Puerto Rico or District of Columbia or something like that, why, we'd end up with 52 stars, and it wouldn't take an act of Congress to change our flag. So that's why this flag is the only American flag that we're going to say flew over us, because it is the same American flag today. But now we've been talking about the fat part of our state. But now it's time to talk a little bit about the skinny part. The part that sticks out over on the side. What is that called? Why, it's called the panhandle. That's right. You know that, don't you? Now, the panhandle's a little different. You see, I told you earlier that when the French, you remember them, when the French claimed this land, they said all the land drained by the mighty Mississippi belongs to France. Well, the truth is, you pour water out in the panhandle, and there's a big question about where it goes. I mean, does it make it to the Mississippi, and would it have been a part of the Louisiana Purchase? Or does the water go someplace else? Well, that argument was that it might be going down to the Rio Grande and coming down and being a part of Spain. Now, during the revolutionary times, I mean, I kind of mentioned that because we had a revolution up here, and there was even a revolution in France that we talked about. Well, there was another revolution in Spain, and that was when this part of the world decided that they didn't want to be a part of Spain any longer, and so there was the Mexican Revolution. Now, Spanish flag was flying over the panhandle, but with the Mexican Revolution, now a new flag flew over our panhandle. Yes, there it is. This is the flag of Mexico. Now, I know everybody says Cinco de Mayo, Cinco de Mayo. Well, that's really a great way of selling tacos. But the truth is that the Mexican Revolution actually occurred more like September. But what ended up happening is now this flag flew over our panhandle, but not for long. You see, this area right here, they called it Tejas. Well, Tejas really became Texas. And Texas didn't really like being a part of Mexico. They wanted to be free too. And they were looking up above and they said, hey, we want to break away. We want to be free. And so there was a great big battle. You might remember it. It was called the Battle of the Alamo. Now, who won the Battle of the Alamo? Was it Mexico? Yes, it was. Because everyone died at the Battle of the Alamo, and so it's kind of hard to win if you're dead. But Santa Anna and his Mexican army were defeated at the Battle of San Jacinto by Houston, and of course then eventually that meant we now had a new country called Texas. And this is the first flag of the Republic of Texas. It is a Lone Star flag. That's what they called it because there's just one star. And they were the Lone Star flag. And they liked this flag pretty much. But they really didn't want to be an independent nation. I know today they kind of act like one. But they really didn't want to be an independent nation. They wanted to be a state. They wanted to join with the United States. And so they were looking at that flag of the United States with its red stripes and white and blue and star. And they decided to come up with their own new flag. And this is, yes, the new flag of the Republic of Texas. Again, it has the Lone Star, and it has the white and the red stripes. Kind of make it look similar. But here's the thing. This is the flag of the Republic of Texas. Now, the flag of the Republic of Texas did fly over our panhandle because we were still a part of that. But when Texas became a state, they missed the boundary by a little bit. And so when they made Texas, they missed the panhandle. And so it was not a part of the state of Texas. So that meant the Texas state flag, which looks just like this, the Texas state flag never flew over Oklahoma and never will. Nope. Well, now, at this time, I wanted to tell you a little bit about, well, at the beginning, I told you that there were no flags of the tribes because the tribes didn't use flags. However, there was one tribe, the Choctaw Nation. Now, I have a little bit of Cherokee blood in me, but my Choctaw Nation friends, they always say, all my Indian blood left with my first nosebleed. I think I told you that. But anyhow, what happens is this is their flag. Very special flag. It has a big shield, yes, and it has a peace pipe with smoke coming out of it, and it has a bow that is not strung. Hard to tell, but this bow is not ready to fire. It's not strung. However, you'll also see that the peace pipe is connected to an axe or a tomahawk. And with the bow are the arrows. So, this is a flag for a time of peace and a time of war. Now, there's a war coming up here, and it's called the Civil War. Now, what in the world is a civil war? A civil sounds like it's very nice and peaceful, like, excuse me, may I shoot at you? And the enemy stands up and says, oh, why, yes, I shall stand still. But that's not what it means. What civil war means is that you're fighting yourself, basically. That meant that colonies or states were fighting other states. And that also meant that tribes were fighting tribes. It was a divided nation and a civil war. In fact, in some families, it was even brothers fighting brothers. Well, during that time, there was a flag that flew over our state. But there was a little bit of a mistake. You see, that flag, I've got it tied to me here, is sometimes called the Confederate flag, which is wrong. I'll explain why in a moment. This is basically the battle flag of the Confederacy. And the truth is, it never was elongated to look like a rectangle. It was always a square. And I'll tell you how that came about. This is a flag that caused people to hurt, and that's why when I told you years ago, 30 years ago, when I went to the state capitol and there's one pole, that pole, the 12th flagpole, was empty, it's because it used to hold this flag. So let's learn a little bit about the Confederacy. Now, This is the actual Confederate flag. Oh, yes, I know it was bigger. But this is the actual Confederate flag, 7 stars in a circle with 3 stripes. Now, this was a fine national flag, because it says something. But it's not a very good flag for battle, because something you might remember is flags were very hard to make. Took time to get them. And so many of the troops fighting on the side of the North were still flying the flag with 13 stars in a circle, the original colonial flag. They were flying that flag, and the South was flying this flag, and during a battle and the smoke and everything like that, do you want to be trying to count stars to see which way to run? No, it didn't make sense. So they decided to use a different flag for battle. And they came up with this one. Now, this flag has that stars and bars you're used to seeing, the little square there, and the rest of the flag was white. And so this flag became the battle flag. But there's a problem. During a battle, if this is flying like that, why, people think you're flying the white flag, which means you are quitting, basically. Well, what this meant is that during the battle, since this white flag was kind of causing a problem, that's when many of the groups would tear out and remove the square so that all you had was this little square flying. And that became the battle flag for a while, with the white part torn off. Well then, a little bit later, they came up with an official flag, which had, of course, the stars and bars and the white panel, but they added a red panel down at the end saying, no, we're not surrendering. No, we're not. So, the 3 different flags there that they used during battle were kind of a confusion. Most of the time, they just tore off that extra part and flew the little square. In fact, if you go down to the state capitol, there's a lovely mural up in the sky there in the dome, and you can see that square flag in there. And that is why the Confederate flag that was put up on the post was a battle flag, not a national flag. So this is the official flag of the Confederacy. And one can fly this flag when you're talking about history. But flying the stars and bars flag, that just hurts people's feelings, and it reminds us of a war. So we'll just calm down about that particular flag. But the tribes that fought on the side of the South, well, all these tribes that had moved out into Oklahoma Territory had been given land by the government because they were independent nations. But then if they fought on the side of the South, and sometimes even if they fought on the side of the North, why, that meant that their land was taken away. And there was unassigned land, such as the Panhandle, lands that didn't belong to any of the tribes. Well, white settlers wanted to be able to get into that land. They wanted to take that land. Now, there were white settlers who snuck over sooner than they were supposed to, and there was a group of what they were called buffalo soldiers from the North who came in to protect the tribal lands. And whenever they found a settler that was improperly there, why, they would fire their small cannon or make a lot of noise, and they would bring all the troops together and they would help usher those people out of Indian Territory. No, so some people say that's where the name Boomer comes from. Other people say the word Boomer comes from the sound of the cannon when they opened up certain territories with land runs, where people ran in and then they would put their stake down and they would reserve their land. That was, of course, the land runs we've seen so many times. But there is no doubt as to why some people were called Sooners. Because with the lotteries, with the land runs, and other things, there were plenty of people who were sneaking in sooner than they were supposed to. And so now we know where Boomer Sooner comes from. However, at 1907, September 17th, 1907, why a group before this had gone up to Washington to make us a state. Now, the Indian tribes, or the Native American tribes, they had wanted to be called the state of Sequoia because he was the Cherokee who had come up with the Sequoian syllabary so that they had a written language. State of Sequoia. Now, the settlers, they wanted it to be called Land of the Red Man, or Oklahoma. So, Oklahoma and Sequoia, when they went up there with all their groups trying to become a state, the country said, well, you're each too small and you've got such large states around you. I don't know how they can complain about our size. We were bigger than Delaware, either one was. But instead, or Rhode Island. So what they did instead was they said, put yourselves together. So on September 17th, 1907, they put them together to make a new state. And it was eventually ratified November 16th, 1907, when, to honor that, we had a wedding. We had a beautiful Indian or Native American bride in a white buckskin wedding dress, and a settler representing the white settlers in his nice black tux and tie. And they had this wedding showing the union of the Indian territories and the Oklahoma territories into the state of Oklahoma. And in 1907, we didn't have a flag. Will Rogers would say that the only flag that flew at that time was his underwear on the clothesline. But in 1911, we came up with a flag, and here it is. Are you excited? Well, I know, it's a bit of a surprise. Well, you see, there's number 46 because we were the 46th state. That's very creative. And it was read for the Indians or the Native Americans, and it was white for the settlers. Not too many people liked it. If you look closely, even the birds didn't like it much. And so they decided that it was time to get a new flag, especially with the rise of communism. They thought this looked like a very communist flag. So they had a contest in 1924, and Mrs. Fluke, her design won, and in 1925, this became our state flag of Oklahoma. Now, it didn't have the word Oklahoma down there, but it did have some things pulled from other native flags. It had the peace symbol of the olive branch, which is more for the settlers, and the peace pipe, which was more for the Native Americans, and the various tribes were represented by feathers and an Osage shield with different stars upon it. And it was a beautiful flag. And then, in 1945, we added the word Oklahoma to the bottom, just to be sure, so that now this became our very wonderful Oklahoma state flag. Brand new state, gonna treat you great.